On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, is shipping heading into troubled waters? I am your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So back in February of 2024, the UN Conference on Trade and Development issued this report, Navigating Troubled Waters, the impact to global trade of disruption of shipping routes in the Red Sea, Black Sea, and Panama Canal. Not the catchiest of all titles there, especially the subpart there, but I do think it is an important one because they were looking at three key areas. I looked at one just the other day here with a discussion about what just happened up in the Black Sea. I'm going to come back to that one in a minute. But it also talks about the Panama Canal with the low water issues in there, and of course, the Red Sea with the Houthis and their influence. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to do a quick little round the world circuit of our three big geopolitical hotspots and talk about what impact they're having on ocean shipping. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So if we're going to talk about trouble spots, one of the best places to go is to look at the UK war risk map to show where are those trouble spots around the world. Now, what they're talking about here is additional protection area maps. This is where you would get your war risk insurance. So, of course, in and around the Persian Gulf region, no surprise, the southern Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandab, one of our favorite spots on the planet, the Gulf of Aden, and the western part of the Indian Ocean, all around Somalia and Yemen, the Gulf of Guinea, all are major areas that need additional protection. Add to it the waters in and around Russia, and of course, the Black Sea, particularly the areas around Ukraine and Russia, the Crimean Peninsula, the Sea of Azov. All of these areas are big trouble spots that require additional protection if you want to sail in those areas. Now, one of the best resources I love to go to is this. This is the IMF Portwatch system. And we've used this repeatedly, particularly looking in around the Red Sea. They monitor trade disruptions and provide a whole slew of information out there on traffic and trade around the planet. So one of the new sections looks at global trade tensions and includes a series of charts that I think are really interesting to look at. So here are port calls by container ships worldwide going back to 2020. Now, this marks a year-on-year percentage change. So obviously, if you go back here into 2020, you have that drop there caused by COVID. You see the uptick here into 2021, the kind of cooling down period, and then a big surge into 2023, into 2024. And now we see that big precipitous drop here at the end of 2025, largely being done because of the tariffs. If you look at shipment totals, they kind of follow the same thing, except this is in metric tons, year-on-year percentage change. And then they do the same thing here, but they break it down by region. So for example, for the United States, you can look at port calls. You can look at the incoming shipments into the United States, big massive spike here as a result of COVID, the drop off post-COVID, and now we're seeing that drop off here of about 9% coming in. And then outgoing shipments, kind of the same thing here, but we do see a bit of a peak and an uptick here in outgoing shipments. You can do the same thing here for China. Notice the impact that the tariffs are having on China. I think one of the things that most people don't realize is while we focus on the impact of the tariffs in the United States, it is having a severe impact in China. We're talking about double-digit drop there in port calls. If you look at incoming shipments here, you can see that incoming shipments kind of fluctuate all the time. This is always that kind of feeding the beast into China. So all those shipments coming in. And then when we look at the outgoing shipments here, you can see that bit of a decline here coming in, but now it's ticking back up. And then same thing, you can look at the same thing here for the European Union. Interesting enough, the European Union seems to be suffering the worst of the three with noticeable drops here on all ends of both incoming and outgoing shipments. You can also focus in on key areas. You can go to choke points, you can go to ports. They have a separate section here for the trade disruption in and around the Red Sea. So for example, you can look at the Suez Canal. Notice that massive drop there in the Suez Canal. As it happens, you can see where it happens right there at December of 2023 and really has not recovered, both in terms of transit calls and when you look at volumes precipitously dropped. Now we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So let's go ahead and look at our individual areas. We're talking about the Red Sea, so let's go ahead and look at Red Sea first. Here's a story from GCAM back in May. Egypt's Suez Canal offers a 15% discount for big container ships to win back trade. Now, Egypt has suffered severely as a result of the Houthi attacks. Last year, they lost somewhere in the range of $7 billion, which was a significant downfall. This story talks about the revenue from the Suez Canal, key source of foreign currency for Egypt, plunged to $880.9 million in the fourth quarter of last year from $2.4 billion a year before. So this is massive. They are losing lots of money and they are trying to draw back traffic. This story from November 5th, Suez Canal reports biggest recovery in vessel traffic since the Red Sea crisis began. Speaking at a meeting with representatives from 20 shipping lines and agencies at the authority's Ismailia headquarters, Admiral Rabi, who's the chairman of the Suez Canal Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit, has positively impacted the return of many vessels. Rabi stated, noting that 229 vessels returned to the waterway during October alone. Then you have this story from Lloyd's List. CMA CGM tests waters with first Asia to Europe ultra-large container ship poised for Red Sea transit. The CMA CGM Benjamin Franklin poised to transit the Suez Canal, potentially the first alliance-operated Asia-Europe ship to re-enter the Red Sea route. The move may signal a cautious test for large-scale returns. Though traffic remains far below pre-level crisis, the French carrier still active in the region has kept limited sailings under French naval escorts. So I am not as big on this story as Lloyd's List is, for the fact that CMA CGM has been sailing through. They allude to at the end there, but all you have to do is go to the Operation Speeds, the European Union's Twitter feed, and you'll see images like this of ships being escorted, in this case, a CMA CGM ship escorted by a Greek frigate, or in this case, another CMA CGM ship being escorted also by a Greek frigate. Not sure if it's the same frigate or not. And I have to note that CMA CGM has an established route that has been open the entire time, the Phoenician Express. Now, it closed during the initial part of the Houthi attacks, but in 2024, they resumed this with 12 ships making 13 port calls with a duration of 84 days. This is the service that's being provided, and here are the dozen or so ships that are doing this route on a fairly routine basis. You'll note that their capacity is pretty substantial, with CMA CGM Adonis at 15,000 containers. Same thing for the Osiris. So, I mean, we definitely see ships of pretty good size going through the region. So it's not like CMA CGM hasn't done this before. I think they just wanted to make a bigger splash with the Benjamin Franklin. Then you have this story also from Lloyd's. No sign of Red Sea return despite ceasefire. Now, this is 22 October. Bab el-Mandeb, Algiers transit down 5% in September. Suez transits continue to increase, but are still well below the pre-Houthi levels. Ceasefire unlikely to be enough to convince owners to return to the Red Sea. That last is really the important thing. You've got to get the war risk insurance down. You've got to get the number down. If I'm going to bring a $500 million to $1 billion container ship through that region, I've got to have something that mitigates my war risk insurance. Either I need the rates to go down, or I need the Marine Nationale riding my shoulder so that they can fend off any potential Houthi attacks and maybe underwrite my war risk insurance, something we don't know if the French are doing. CMA CGM has gotten a lot of protection from the European Union's Operation Speeds. I have to wonder if they're getting some sort of quid pro quo kind of attention there by the European Union and cutting back on their insurance. It'll be interesting to find out. All right, let's go ahead and head over to the Black Sea. Now, as I noted, I did a video the other day talking about a Ukraine targeting the Russian Black Sea ports. And I noted in this video that this is an escalation. I got some great comments and feedback on it. When I say great, I don't mean great. It was some pretty nasty comments, I must say, I got. I have been told that I am pro-Putin, anti-Putin, pro-Ukraine, anti-Ukraine, and just all around naive. Okay. What I said in that video, and I'm going to stand by what I said in that video, although I am going to clarify some of the comments I said in that video, is number one, I have talked about this conflict for a long time. If the first time you've seen me is that video, then my apologies. I probably should have given you more background information. but I've been talking about this topic for quite a while. I mean, I've talked about it from the very beginning. We've talked about the evolution of the Ukraine grain corridor. We talked about the Black Sea grain renewal and the operations with that. Talked about the Russians conducting operations to stop ships coming in and out of the Black Sea. And we talked about the Russians striking specifically ships coming in and out of Ukraine, including ships in the Danube River and near Romania. So it's not like I haven't talked about this. And I even went in detail and gave a talk to NATO about the comparison between the Red Sea and the Black Sea that I put online for you. So, I mean, I've talked about this quite a bit. Granted, maybe in a 10, 12-minute video, I didn't go into enough detail to explain that. So let me take a step back and talk about what's going on in the Black Sea now and why I think that this is fairly important. So here's a story over at Lloyd's List. Ukraine hits Russia key oil export facility in the Black Sea. Ukraine hit Russia's Tuapse port with drones, setting fire to an oil loading terminal and at least one tanker. According to Russian officials, there are no casualties, but the terminal was damaged. Matter of fact, latest imagery shows some major oil leaks in and around the terminal. There is no information if the terminal has started operations, but according to Lloyd's List intelligence tracker, no tankers pulled at the ports since the attack. Earlier in October, we have this story: Ukraine's maritime traffic down 30% as years of conflict hits the grain exports. Grain-carrying vessels are driving the decrease as conflict-related factors lead to low harvest yields. Security-related issues are impacting Black Sea maritime traffic with an increase in direct attacks on its ports. Liquefied petroleum gas carriers are heading to the Danube River ports rather than the Black Sea. And understand, I don't cover every story that comes in. I am a one-person show covering more than just the Black Sea. I cover all global shipping. So if I don't talk about an attack, it's not because I don't want to talk about attack, it's just because I don't have the time or I have to prioritize other stories that come in. So for example, this story back in March, 4 killed in Russian strike on grain vessel in Odesa port. Ukraine says this is talking about an attack in the port. This is a ship, the MJ Pinar, where some Syrian crew members were injured. Russian missile attack on Tuesday damaged a grain vessel, killing 4 people, Ukrainian authorities said. I will note that one of the things that's really important to note is that the Russians and Ukrainians have targeted each other's infrastructure. There's no questioning about that. And they've hit vessels. The question is whether the vessels are intentionally targeted or are they incidental to the targeting of the ports. For example, in that case, I'm not sure that the ship was the target as much as the port was the target. And you see that here in this BBC story from October. Russian strike kills 8 in fresh attack on Ukrainian port. Russian missiles hit a civilian container ship at the port in Ukraine's Odesa region, killing 8 people. This is the 3rd attack on a civilian vessel in the past 4 days, says the region's head. He said Russia has targeted port infrastructure and all the victims were Ukrainians. And again, Russia has targeted Ukrainian ports. Ukraine has targeted Russian ports. No question about that. And I could take you through the entire conflict with the kind of the swing, the pendulum swing for when Russia sailed into the Gulf of Odesa, cut Ukraine off. Ukraine struck back, sinking Moskva, pushing the Russians back out, taking Snake Island. Then you get the grain agreement that comes in place with the corridor, so Ukraine can move grain. Then the corridor breaks down. Ukraine just starts shipping grain. I mean, we could go through the whole thing. What I was trying to point out in the story the other day was this. This is a story. Ukraine's Navy says 3 vessels were at Tuapse oil terminal during strike. This is the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Navy, Dmytro Pletichuk. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I apologize. The information is still being clarified as different sources report varying details. However, all of them agree that at the moment of the incident, at least 3 vessels were present at the platform loading oil. According to him, these vessels have a semi-shadow status and their owners have already been identified. All right, I don't know what semi-shadow means. If he's referring to shadow fleet, understand there is no restriction in loading oil in Russia. Ships can go to Russia and load oil. Where there is a restriction is that under the G7 and the EU, there are caps put on the export of oil by Russia. In other words, you are technically under the sanction not supposed to sell oil above a certain price. However, that enforcement is done through insurance. And so it's very difficult to prove that this is being done. So that's number one here. Second, this statement: these ports are highly significant for Russia's energy exports. Previously, they accounted for up to 20% of Russia's crude oil exports. Goes on. He emphasized that the strike on the Tuapse oil terminal will have long term consequences, including, and this is the part I emphasized on the other video, expected reactions from the maritime companies operating in the region and a likely drop in the readiness of ships to enter these ports. Quote, at the same time, the vessels that participated in circumventing sanctions not only assume the risks associated with loading at locations that, from our perspective, are entirely legitimate targets. So he is saying that if you are loading oil or diesel fuel above the price, then you are a legitimate target and you can be aimed for by the Ukrainian Navy. That is the big difference. Let me be clear. That is a big difference because now you're going to target commercial ships, even if they're in ports. That is a big jump. One of the things that has happened largely up to this point, not fully, there are examples of Russia and Ukraine hitting ships, but almost unanimously, they have avoided hitting commercial ships coming to and from the ports because they want the trade to continue. Ukraine wants to export its grain. Russia wants to export its food, fuel, and fertilizer, including seized grain from Ukraine. They want to ship them out. If Ukraine now wants to start targeting ships carrying Russian fuel above the price cap, which is being imposed by G7 and EU, that's a different thing. And now that means that Russia could conceivably attack ships coming out of Ukraine carrying grain. And this is where I think that you can have the escalation. And again, we have a lot of issues on the high seas, as I talked about, South China Sea, confrontation between China and the Philippines. We've got the U.S. in and around Venezuela, in the Caribbean. We've got the Baltic. We've got the Arctic. You name it. We've got issues all over the place. Got the Houthi in the Red Sea. All of that measures come in, and that means that we have to deal with those issues. All right. Our third place we're looking at is the Panama Canal. Now, you may remember the Panama Canal had issues with low water back in 2024. Panama Canal said revenues rose about 14.4% in fiscal year 2025 to 5.7 billion based on preliminary and unaudited figures. The canal also reported that vessel transits increased 19.3% year on year to 13,404 during the 12-month period, which ended on September 30th. Container and liquefied petroleum gas segments drove revenue growth, while bulk carrier traffic continued to recover. Then you have this story. Panama Canal announced significant modifications to its transit reservation system with the unveiling of its next generation long-term slot allocation program, LOTSA. The enhanced system aims to provide greater certainty, flexibility, and value for canal users. Building on the experience of 1.0, this enhanced program introduces a more customer-focused approach to support efficient transit planning and cost-effective operation. So the Panama Canal sees anywhere from roughly around 30 to 34 ships a day going through it. When the canal hit its low point because of low water, it was down to about 22 passages a day. So hop over to the IMF Portwatch. You can see the dip right here where we saw that low water kind of hit in here right around January of 2024 to July of 2024. That seasonal dip came in there, which saw the number of ships coming through. And matter of fact, if you go here and you look at the volume here, you see that dip in volume there too. So a precipitous drop came in during that period of time. And one of the things that Panama Canal has done is you can book your passage in advance. You can make a long-term passage. That is great for container ships and cruise ships, which can make schedules long in advance. Tankers and bulk carriers don't work that way. As I've always said, that the analogy here is that container ships and passenger liners operate like airlines. They have set schedules you can book far out in advance. Tankers and bulkers operate like Uber. They go with the flow. And the problem they had during the low point there is there was a bidding process that went in. The canal has raised its rates. They've done this high avenue bidding that goes in. And so it has created problems in getting through the canal. We may see another dip coming with the canal coming up if the seasons align the way we think they are. There is potential for low water again in the canal. At the same time, Panama Canal announced this is launching a dedicated transit reservation system designed specifically for low emission ships. The Net Zero Slot Initiative will reserve weekly transit capacity for ships meeting stringent environmental criteria, creating a clear market incentive for shipping companies investing in greener technology. This is going to be implemented during the first transit week of November 2nd through 8th. And so we're seeing these green corridors set up. So if you have green corridors set aside for net zero vessels, ships that are emitting less carbon, you can book ahead for your container ship, your passenger ship. And if you're a bulk carrier, if you're an ore carrier, if you're a tanker, you'll be out of luck. There's only so many transits through the canal, and through the big lane of the canal, there is only 8 to 10 passages any day through the canal. And so that is going to be a major choke point. And what we're seeing is ships diverting around, going around Africa, and potentially maybe through the Suez Canal if the Suez Canal opens back up. So I think it's time, UNCTAD, and maybe somebody take a look at it. And that's why we did it here. What's going on with shipping? Take a look at those three major areas that were talked about in navigating troubled waters: the Red Sea, the Black Sea, and the Panama Canal. And understand, those issues will resonate far beyond the Red Sea, the Black Sea, and the Panama Canal. When you have disruptions in those seas, even in the Black Sea, it will resonate across the global maritime spectrum. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do it? You hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. So I hope I clarified my comments from my video the other day. If not, I'm sorry, but you know what? I'm going to say what I'm going to say. I try not to have an opinion. I try to be as impartial as I can. My philosophy as a professor is to be an educator, not an indoctrinator. I do have biases. There's no question about it. Go New York Yankees. Go University of Alabama football. Roll Tide. I have my biases. Go Campbell. I have biases. There's no doubt about that. But when I try to talk about commercial shipping, I try to keep biases out as much as I can and provide you what I think is the most important thing when it comes to shipping. So next episode, this is Sal. Sign off.